Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories, the regular. I hope you all enjoy it. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating as it helps out the channel immensely. Let's see if we can break 1,005 likes. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated, as I post stuff just like this all of the time. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. So, about this childhood friend, Sarah. Nice girl. She had blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Knew her since elementary school. She had Pokemon Pearl and I had Pokemon Diamond. So this led us on the fast track to being best friends due to the needs to trade between the two versions, and our shared love of Pokemon. We became even closer with sleepovers, camping trips, and living only a 20-minute bike ride away from each other. Middle school is when she started getting really into occult stuff. First, it was a Ouija board. She would pull that out pretty much every night we hung out together, trying to speak to the dead. She got into crystals and witch culture online after that, but she didn't stop there. By 7th grade, she had cut herself for a magic ritual, and it was a very deep cut on her palm too. She actually ended up having major nerve damage on her hand, and her parents quickly got her into therapy, but none of that even came close to stopping her obsession with the occult. It was a non-stop barrage of cryptids, magic, cults, demons, spirits. It was all she ever talked about. She once showed me these super creepy sites on a Tor browser. She said they had secret symbols with real power. She had a necklace cropped together made from wood, metal, and other various jewels. I think there was some hair on there too, from a sheep or something. It was modeled after one of those symbols. The one called Gateway. It was one large circle surrounding a smaller circle inside. Inside the smaller circle was a mandala artwork. The symbol flowed down from that with 2 small circles leading to an upside down triangle. On her necklace, both the circles were made of wood, and the mandala was sewn together with multicolored threads. Just below that circle was a trail of jade and quartz, leading to an upside-down triangle that she claimed was obsidian. She wore that necklace literally every single day. All day. I never saw her without it. This, and the other parts of her obsession, made her an easy target for bullying. I was her only friend. I'm ashamed to admit I stopped talking to her to avoid being bullied by association. She ended up dropping out in grade 11, and that was the last I saw of her. Until yesterday, 3 years later, when she knocked on the door to my dorm that night. I almost immediately slammed the door in her face when I saw her. She looked terrifying. She was completely bald and her skin was pallid and gray. She smelled like rotten eggs and wore clothes that could generously be described as old rags. She had an awful fresh-looking burn on her face and her eyes were clouded over. The only reason I recognized her was that she was still wearing the same necklace. After a moment of gawking, I managed to regain my composure and ask, "Sarah, is that you?" "Hey," she said. "Long time no see." Probably rudely, I asked, "What happened to you?" A rueful chuckle rose from her and she said, "Oh, more than you could ever know. More than you would ever want to." I honestly wasn't sure if I should even let her into my house. My first suspicion was that she became an addict of some sort, but I did have a lot of sympathy. I mean, she was a friend of mine and clearly was going through a lot. The guilt overcame my better judgment and I invited her in. She felt around for the door frame and took tentative steps inside. She walked towards my living room, keeping her hand on the wall the entire time. Watching her walk in my house, Another question came into my mind. How did you find me anyway? She smiled wryly and said, that wasn't hard at all. Facebook. I laughed nervously. Oh, of course. I also thought to myself that I need to get my location off of the internet as soon as possible. Regardless, I helped her find a seat on my couch and sat across from her in my recliner. I tried to be a good host and asked her if she needed anything to drink. She declined. We sat in awkward silence for a moment before Sarah broke the ice. So, what have you been up to lately? I said bluntly, not much, just trying to get through college. I swallowed a bit before asking, what about you? She contemplated for a moment before answering, reaching, trying to see beyond the veil, trying to be more than an ape on a goddamn rock, getting just a step away from cosmic mediocrity. So close now, farther away than ever. I was stunned. I was worried she had suffered a mental break or something. I mean, how do you even react when someone says something like that so genuinely and seriously? I reacted by sputtering out, that's cool. She sighed and looked straight at me despite her blindness. You could have been great too, you know. You settled for insignificance. I needed to get her out of my dorm immediately. It was 100% a mistake to ever let her in here. The question was how. If I straight up told her to leave, it would be a fight, and I was unsure if she'd be willing to turn to violence. I decided in that moment I'd let her stay the night and find an excuse to get her out tomorrow. Hopefully she would leave of her own accord sooner, though. I brushed off her comment with a laugh and asked if she wanted to watch TV. I did cringe when I said watch, but she didn't seem to mind. I have Apple TV, but none of my channels would load. I checked my phone and it also wouldn't connect to anything. My internet was out. Just my luck. When in doubt, stressy. I decided to make some ramen. I asked Sarah if she wanted any, but she declined. I sat across from her and ate my ramen, silently hoping this encounter would end. I tensed up as she began to speak. So, can I ask for something from you? My thoughts immediately go to money. She wants what little savings I have, and there's a distinct possibility she'll get violent if I say no. She continued to speak. Can I crash on your couch tonight? I suppressed my sigh of relief that that's all she wanted. I could accommodate that. I replied, sure. I think I'll be hitting the hay soon, honestly. Sarah said, oh, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Alarm bells immediately start ringing in my head and I spat out angrily. What the hell do you mean by that? She snarked back. Oh, I've read your thoughts. You think I'm some monster here to rob one of the few friends I've ever had. I would never do that. It's not me you have to worry about. What do you mean it's not you? Sarah, is someone after you? Should I call the cops? I wish it was just someone who was after me, she said, a hint of sadness in her voice. She continued on. I know you don't believe in any of this shit, but I went too far. I tried to see what no one is ever meant to. I tried to know the unknowable. This burn, the stealing of my eyesight. It was a punishment. This shocked me and I asked passionately, who did this to you? She angrily replied, it's not a who, it's that damn... She stopped herself from speaking. I could see blood start leaking from her nose. She muttered to herself, you can't do it yet. You can't do it yet. You can't do it yet. My worry had reached a new level. Was some gangster or dealer gonna break into my dorm to come kill her? And maybe me simply because I'm here? I took a deep breath and tried to dismiss those fears, and some of the more improbable ones I had. Sarah and I sat in silence for what felt like forever. I checked my phone a few times. The internet was still out. I decided I'd just go to sleep and hope for the best. Just as I was about to get up, the power flickers off. Sarah gasped and said, "Shit, it's coming. Stay beside me, please." I was shuddering in fear, and all I could do was nod. Mystical or not, there was potentially real danger. I decided to go and dial 911. My phone rang and eventually connected to the police department. I sighed in relief and spoke. Oh, thank the Lord. I'm in my dorm 115 at... I was cut off by the most horrid sound I've ever heard. It sounded like nails on a chalkboard in a factory amplified right next to my ears. That sound started to form words. Sarah Warren. Sarah Warren. Sarah Warren. It went on like that until Sarah took the phone out of my hands and shut it off. I was full on panicking and grabbed her, yelling, "What the fuck was that? What was that?" She was tense and said nothing to me. We stood there in the dark for about a minute. The only sound was both of us breathing heavily. With a massive bang, the door to my dorm flew off its hinges and into the hall. The ground beneath my feet was shaking in tremendous force, and I could hear my TV fall off its stand. My hair and clothes blew back like I was in a wind tunnel, but so much more intense. I could feel an electric charge around me, and all my hair stood on end. The dark was illuminating by a bright, iridescent light. A thing floated into my room. It looked like a rainbow Mobius strip mixed with a tesseract, infinitely collapsing in on itself and reforming. I could feel a vice grip of hands on me. Sarah grabbed me and held me in front of her. She yelled out, "Please, take her instead. An ignorant soul." The thing responded with a voice deeper than thunder that echoed more than a cave. "I care not for your appeasement, you power seeker. You know too much for your station. You will pay the cost for your knowledge." Sarah's grip on me loosened and the thing dragged her towards it. She screamed and begged for help, but her body was dragged into it. I could see her shape and body distort in an inhuman way as she let out a last shriek of incredible pain. Then the thing simply vanished. The ground stopped shaking and everything became calm. The police came 30 minutes later. Apparently the whole dorm building felt the earth shaking. They said it was a burst pipe in the boiler room. In addition to police, there were men in black suits. They said they wanted to speak to me tomorrow. I don't know who they are, but I think they know what I saw. I can handle myself in a tough spot. Adapting to a fucked situation is a part of my job, or at least a core piece of the mantra we have. I took some leave from the standard military life and decided to hop over to mainland Japan rather than spend 10 days beating around Oki. Typical shit here. I landed in Haneda Airport, cast a few glances at the new boots carrying sea bags and deployment cases, and kept it moving to the nearest train towards Tokyo. Turns out my Japanese is a little bad. That, or the bottle of soju. I had ruined my sight, so I wound up in some small residential town miles away from the city. Adapt and improvise. Bullshit the rest. As an American, white and 6 foot total in my square toes, I stood out badly, and most of the people moving about both stared and gave me a wide berth. Following my nose to the smell of seafood stock, I sat down to some ramen in a tiny little noodle shack down the road from the station and ate probably the best ramen I had eaten so far. Now, about this time the sun started to set. The chill turned to cold and I took the sideways glances the cook was giving me to bounce out and find a different place to squat. Cue shit turning up to 100. Dark came quickly. And quicker did the full moon rise and the air turn painfully cold. My best idea was to find a Lawson, buy some spicy chicken and some strongs, and tuck away into some love hotel if there was one. What instead happened was nearly every light turning off 30 or 45 minutes down another series of twisting roads in every house. and the slight breeze fading into nothing. A very unpleasant smell spread around me, and the hairs on my neck stood up like I was being shocked. "You shouldn't be here," croaked a jagged old voice to my right. The English was strained hard and sounded full of spite and disdain, and when I looked expecting to see someone, an old woman made of wrinkles and moles returned my look. She had a death grip around a twisted branch cane, and her eyes looked like they were scanning at me through the determined glare. Before I could respond, another voice came from behind me, like a forced whisper. I knew in my heart I hadn't heard any footsteps, hadn't felt any other presence. It was either there the moment I stopped moving, or had been coming straight at me in the air. "You shouldn't be here." Hate, malice. The voice belonged to a man with either a crushed throat or a grinder for a voice box. If a sack of rocks could be a tone, this was it. The breath smelled of fermented sardines and bile. I knew then that I needed to move, and move fast. The lights flicked back on, a loud pop of electricity, and there around me was a sudden crowd of very, very pissed off Japanese folks. "You shouldn't be here," all in unison. "I'm just going, I promise. Trying to find a hotel or honcho," and took a forward bow to hopefully show deep regret. That's when my stomach twisted into a knot. What feet weren't hovering a few inches above the ground were those of chickens, hooves, and amalgamations of knuckles and talons. None of them human. The air grew truly still. A weight sunk into my chest, and the notion of looking back up felt like a death sentence. Inching up to my full height felt excruciatingly long, and I wished I had just stayed bent over. Yellow and red eyes dotted the crowd. Each held the most utter look of evil I had ever seen. "You shouldn't be here," the woman croaked again, and she wrapped an icy hand on my right arm. I felt scales and talons on my flesh, and something told me turning to her was what she wanted. I began to back away slowly, hoping her grip would let loose, but she dug in harder, and I felt the warm rush of blood race down to my fingers. Something happened then that haunts me to this day. They all began to tremble and shake erratically. Grunts and growls began to break apart the otherwise dead silence, and they all collectively took a step forward. All as one, their eyes a shade more intense. They gnashed their teeth to make an awful racket on the ears, like busting glass, then took another step. Something in your body tells you when something serious is about to happen, be it danger, happiness, sadness. It's a primal ability I think lies dormant in the average human until a truly life-changing moment is about to occur. Likely it's some survival skill our ancestors used to last through the nights against saber-tooths and shit. What I felt was terror, and what I imagined a wildebeest feels when a lion pride is circling him. Prey amidst a cluster of predators. I saw the crowd of things jolt forward. The talons in my arm tore down to my wrist, and I heard the hiss and howls of hell in my ears. I was fucking dead. Then came bells. Furiously ringing bells. I was jerked around to see the ramen shop owner flailing a large bell and staring around with pure horror on his face. And I felt that old woman let go, and his hand clamped down around the back of my neck. He was shouting something at me in a shrill voice, and next thing I knew I was running with him. I needed no explanation, no reason. If I fell behind him, I was dead. Even in a max effort sprint, he clanged that bell, screaming lines of Japanese over and over to anything that would listen. Behind us bellowed those things, a symphony of guttural noises, hisses, and roars. We ran for what felt like hours until we turned a corner to see the dim glow of his neon ramen sign, and we both instinctively picked up the pace. The bell began to ring so loud it made my head pound, and behind us came screeches even louder than before. I don't remember the next part clearly. We went from on the street running to inside his tiny shack and stacking chairs and tables against the door. He didn't let go of his bell, though. He threw furniture just the same with one hand. Outside our pitiful barricade was those things, and they clawed and pounded away at the walls and doors trying to get in. Seemingly gliding across the counter, he threw me a container of salt and 2 small plates and screamed something in Japanese, pointing to the foot of the barricade. I knew it meant fucking pour, and so I did. After a bit of pouring, he yanked the salt and one of the plates from me and ran into the back. My gut told me he had another door he was covering. When he came back, he handed me a large sushi knife and a bell. He had a knife, too, so we rang our bells. Hours passed. Bells and screams, pounding and scratching. I figured out he was reciting prayers after listening hard enough, so I began praying to God, too. Figured we both better get our deities on the line. Another set of hours grinded by until the scratches began to fade. The roar of monsters began to roar less and less, until all that was left was a singular thud. It was wooden and stiff sounding, like a singular cane against the shack walls. The ramen shop owner bellowed out a line I knew was cussing, and a loud hiss responded before the scurrying of reptile feet drifted away. Morning came bitterly slow. The foul smell left, and I saw relief on the shop owner's face. He kissed the bell and bowed to the pile of salt before we began taking down the barricade. When we peeked outside, we were greeted by a less horrific crowd. A bunch of locals were huddled around the ramen shop, gawking at the thousands of scratches, gouges, and teeth marks on the building. They gasped at the dried blood on my arms and clothes, and eventually the authorities came to get me. Guess someone called it in. It seemed as if they didn't care about the scene or outright refused to acknowledge it. Either way, they put me in cuffs and escorted me to a clinic for treatment. They let me keep the bell, too. When they questioned me, they laughed at what I told them and promptly made their translator ask if I had been smoking meth. Even did a drug test on me. When they couldn't find anything, they cut me loose and warned me about staying out late again. I didn't need a second warning. I got my happy ass on the next flight to Oki and never returned. Last week, I decided to sign up for membership at a gym in my city. I don't have a lot of money right now, and since gas is currently expensive again, and public transportation is pretty good here, I decided I'd take the bus, or more accurately, 2 buses, as the best way to get there was to ride one route east, then get off and catch another route south. Things weren't looking too unusual that day, but as I rode that first bus east, I did notice we were entering a part of town I didn't remember ever being before. Also, as if by some luck-altering curse, maybe halfway through that ride I realized I needed to use the toilet. It wasn't really urgent at the time, but I still figured that after getting out of the bus at this transfer point, I'd go find a public restroom before boarding the next. As I said, public transportation is good here, so if I missed a bus, another for the route would come soon enough. I looked around the bus stop. Most buildings on this side of the street seemed like apartments, though a few might have been offices. However, one exception was what looked like a supermarket. Most of the recognizable features were there. The building was large, rather tall for what was likely just one floor. Its front was made largely of windows. Its doors were also windowed. The walls were made of the usual supermarket material, and above its front entrance was a sign consisting of separate, big red letters. The sign read, Dragon's Den. It was an odd name for a supermarket for sure, and in retrospect, the font might also have been a bit unusual, but I wasn't exactly bothered. I went in through the door and saw a customer and cashier talking to each other in a foreign language at the closest register. I also realized that I couldn't read any of the signs labeling what was in the aisles. I remembered at that point that the street was a major Vietnamese area, or at least the part of it I knew further west was. That must also be the case here, I thought. A lot of Chinese businesses are called something about dragons, so they're probably a big part of Vietnamese culture too. I did think it was odd that the front sign was the only English one here, but for all I know, having an English sign out front is required in this city. I didn't want to interrupt the conversation the cashier and customer were having, and feared they might not even understand me, so I just made a left and walked along the wall, searching for the hall that typically leads to restrooms in these places. It was as I was walking to the first corner that I noticed this place wasn't as normal on the inside as on the outside. The most striking example I saw of this were the shopping carts. Instead of the conventional kind, what people were pushing around here almost looked more like baby strollers, made of some sort of cloth or leather, but longer and a bit wider, and with multiple compartments. There were the baskets for smaller loads that many supermarkets have too, except these were literal baskets, made of wicker fibers. Or were they wicker? Whatever it was looked greener, almost like jungle vines. A few of the items on sale also seemed strange to me, like the aisle labels. I couldn't read any of the text on them, but I noticed a lot of things weren't sold in typical bottles and jars. Instead, they were in what looked like larger versions of salt and pepper shakers. I reached the first corner and made a right, walking through what must have been the produce section. And things continued to look bizarre. I saw piles of fruits, or maybe vegetables, that were oval-shaped and looked like they were covered in grass, and some plants that looked like miniature trees, except purple. I reached another corner and turned right again, passing through a meat department. There were some things here I recognized, but more I didn't. Some of what I saw may have been lobster, but also looked different. As with most meat in supermarkets, much of this had been cut up so much it wasn't clear what it was, but smell was different from all other meat sections I had been in before. Not bad, but very strange. I walked on to a drink department, and here I had a more definite reaction. As in normal supermarkets, there were large refrigerated cabinets for drinks, but the bottles within didn't look like any I'd seen in any other supermarkets. I didn't know what was liquor, juice, milk, or something else, but all of the bottles looked more like potion bottles I would see in fantasy films or games. Odd shapes and colors, plus caps that weren't the standard modern little metal things, but more like doorknobs on top of the bottles. When I reached the next corner, I finally found what I was looking for, an opening to a hall, presumably to the restrooms. I started walking down the hall, which, as it turned out, took me back the way I had just come, as it ran parallel to the store's back wall. In fact, I could see that it was even longer, reaching another corner at the end and continuing left towards the front of the store. I had seen no signs that there actually were restrooms at the end of this, but it seemed like where they would be, so I continued. As I reached this hall's corner, though, something dawned on me. This hallway wasn't totally parallel to the store's back wall because it was also a ramp down. As I turned the corner, it continued down, except this time I think it was a bit steeper, and the new one, too, ended at a corner. Well before reaching that, I began to notice a strange noise coming from down the hall. It was a mechanical sound, regular in time, deep in pitch. I might write it out as Bafa, Bafa, Bafa. As I stepped further down this ramp hall, the sound didn't just get louder, but I also could actually feel it, shaking the floor a bit. My own footsteps echoed down the hall, too, reminding me of just how barren it was. I started to get that feeling of loneliness one gets in a place by oneself, when it feels like nobody else even exists anymore. After turning the third corner of this hall, I was certain I was down lower than the floor of the store and parking lot outside, which was odd, but I continued. My efforts finally paid off as the hall led me into a wider room with level floors. To my right were what looked like a washing machine and a dryer of sorts, but plus a wash station for mops. To the left, a door to a restroom. I went in and opened the nearest stall door to me, only to find only a large hole on the floor. Not going there, I thought, and tried one of the two stalls to the right. This one actually had a toilet and paper. The toilet was a bit weird, though. It wasn't connected to the wall behind, instead having a pipe entering it right from the ceiling, and the toilet's shape was almost like a coffee maker. It fit me fine, though, so I sat down and did my business. Then as I sat there, I heard the bathroom door squeak open. Someone knocked on my stall door and asked a question in a language I didn't understand. I could only say, "Huh?" The guy outside repeated his question, this time sounding more demanding. It sounded something like, "Paskusasap ka." This time I actually shouted, "I don't understand what you're saying." I heard whoever it was gasp, saying something that I was certain included the phrase again, but otherwise couldn't really make it out. He stormed out of the restroom and I shivered. Was I in trouble? I wondered why doing this would get me in trouble here. I finished up wiping, then went to the sink to wash. The faucet was normal enough, but the soap dispenser gave me what felt and smelled like the most chemical-filled soap gets. I genuinely wondered if it would hurt my skin, but I couldn't even focus on that because of what I saw in the mirror. It was the first stall I had opened, its door now hanging far open. I realize now something I hadn't when I'd moved on it from it hastily. The stall's door was unusually wide. As I looked into the stall, I saw that it, too, was even wider, with that large hole right in the middle. I was intrigued enough to look closer at it, and a bit deep into the hole, maybe a bit over half a foot, was this hot pink liquid. I almost noticed levers on one end of a stall. This wasn't just a big hole in the wall. It was actually some sort of toilet, albeit a really scary one that a person could actually fall in. About then, I decided it was definitely time to leave. I exited the bathroom door and gave my surroundings one more look. To the right was that hall ramp I'd come down. To the left was yet another hall ramp leading down even further, maybe turning yet another corner. I had no intention of following that latter one, even before I heard the noises coming from it. Not the mechanical bafa, bafa, bafa. Those had never stopped. But soon after opening the bathroom door, I heard the sound of what I thought was another door opening, echoing up the hall. It sounded like a door that had some tight sealing system when closed. As I thought, I could hear a small suction sound as it opened. The mechanical noises got much louder until I heard the door close again. And then, I heard something I could not misinterpret. Footsteps, coming down these winding ramp halls. I had felt some dread at being so alone. Now, I was far more scared because someone was in the halls with me and getting nearer. I strode into the hall on the right, ramping upward and around the first corner. As the mechanical noises dimmed, I noticed that the footsteps had gotten faster, so I got faster as a result. In fact, before long, I was running. Then as I approached the next corner, I ran right into a person almost before I could see him. The person, who was making his way down the hall in the opposite direction, was a strange one. He was completely bald, his flesh reddish and calloused, and from how he felt when I crashed into him, he was likely rather muscular, and was barely knocked back at all. But he was wearing what looked a bit like a wedding dress, billowing around him and a long skirt trailing behind, except this dress was jade green. He shouted at me, spit flying out of his mouth. As with everything else in this place, I couldn't understand it, but I'm assuming he was cussing me out. I wondered if he was about to attack me, so I just started running again, this time slowing just enough near the corners not to repeat that mistake. I felt something like relief as I entered the main part of the store again, but I wondered if I really should. Perhaps only the relative familiarity and the sight of other people walking around eased me. I slowed down, but still went straight to the front and out the door. I couldn't help wonder if whoever was chasing me would keep doing it, all the way out to the bus stop. I kept looking back at the Dragon's Den, and whenever I saw anyone come out, I stood up, ready to run again, but in retrospect, all of them had carts or baskets and bags. They were normal customers, presumably not in league with my pursuant. I only really felt more at ease when my intended bus came and I got in. I was lucky this happened to be the route I intended to board, because if any other bus had come first, I probably would have boarded it just to get away from here. And who knows where I'd end up. But as luck would have it, I did reach the gym and start my membership. Despite calming down a bit, I don't think I've ever been so good at lifting weights as I was that day, as its misadventures had pumped me full of hormones. The workout and shower did make me feel better, and though I might have dreaded the return trip, I had already plotted both ways out beforehand, and knew that it was faster to take different routes home. So, a relatively peaceful 2 trips later, I walked back up to my front door and walked in, prompting my dog to charge over to greet me, as he often does. That's normally cute, but on that night, noticing him made something horrifying click. Literally. In fact, dogs have claws on their feet, a lot like cat claws, except they're always out, and on some hard floors, those claws make a clicking noise as they run across. As he bounded up, I realized just how much that claw sound resembled the footsteps I heard coming up the ramp haul towards me. Except that what I heard was much louder, so whatever made it was likely much heavier. Yes, I had been thinking of it as a who up until now, but on realizing that my pursuant's feet had claws, it's now a what for me. That wasn't my only scary epiphany. A few days later, I went into a little Vietnamese restaurant, and after only a quick glance at the menu, remembered something I had already learned. Vietnamese is written in Roman letters, plus some marks. Those signs in that store were not. They were not Vietnamese. They were in an alphabet I have never seen before and may never see again. I have returned to my new gym since, but now I always drive, specifically avoiding that part of town where I had my horrifying experience. I have no intention to go back there, but I know there are people who will. Maybe some will enter to use the toilet just as I did. But there is also a chance that some will venture down those halls all the way, just to see where they lead. To a door, behind which is some heavy machinery, is how it sounded. Who knows if any curious visitors can get past it, but if they can, or if whatever came out of it when I was there comes out of it after them, well, I don't know what all will happen. But I suspect that then, the visitors will learn the real reason they call this store the Dragon's Den. Again, these nails were done by the owner of Sasha's Sexy Nails. Thanks again for letting us film today. I stopped recording, and Sasha rolled her eyes at me. I'm fine with filming, always, but do your followers really like seeing every single part of your day? She began putting her nail equipment away. I glanced at the pretty snowflakes decorating my fresh blue manicure. I loved the winter look. It was an eternal debate I had, too. But I got the most views, and therefore most money, when I did daily vlogs like this. I guess so. Some of the comments say they enjoy being able to personally experience things they can't do. I don't know. Like they can't afford to get their nails done, so they watch me do it on the next vlog. That's a terrible way of explaining things, girl. I'm just worried that you aren't safe with everyone constantly knowing what you're doing. The timer on the gel dryer dings from my left hand, so I stand up and give her a soft smile. It's not too much information, Sash. It's like the amount they get from watching their favorite actress do a behind the scenes. I'll talk to you later. I have to call my mom in an hour and better do some dishes. My place is a mess. I waved goodbye to the analyzing Sasha, was trying to start, and headed towards the hall to grab my shoes. Sasha was bringing up more of a dangerous con to what I've devoted my daytime to. She was the first person to ever bring this up to me, and as I walked to my car, in the chilly November weather, I thought it was just the wind causing chills to run down my spine. A week had passed since I had my nails done by Sasha, and I was sifting through clips of video to edit into another weekly vlog for my followers. If this kind of content paid the bills, I'd keep doing it. I had a lot of college debt wafting away and only 2 more semesters before I'd have a degree to numb the weight of it. I live in a 4-story apartment building that gets paid for by inheritance my grandfather left me. It's a pretty average apartment, but my favorite features are the beautiful balcony doors across from a fully furnished kitchen, and the security on every floor. It is also only about a 5-minute drive from the campus I do classes on. There are so many cutesy shops in between. Editing was a pretty easy job from the comfort of my couch, and I am relying on potato chips as my primary source of fuel until I'd meet my friends at around 8 tonight for dinner. I had soft music playing in the background of my intro, my internet name expanding into view. Hey guys, it's me again, and I know you're all dying to see what my plans look like this week. I accomplished a lot more than My internet persona had her own name, different from my birth name, to protect some of that security Sasha was talking about. Looking back on it, I decided not to mention my internet persona's name, as my videos are still out there generating views and I don't really want any of my avid fans to find this. On pausing the introduction, I furrow my eyebrows in confusion as I glance at the reflection in the window of my bedroom from the recording. It looks as if there's a shadow of a figure, possibly a woman glancing at me with wide eyes. I rewind the footage and play it in slow motion. It's there for a brief second, but it's long enough for me to take a picture and send it to the security number of this complex. My heart is beating slightly as I call the number. When they answer, I explain that I noticed a woman looking through my window. She must have been on the fire escape, they tell me. How long ago did you film that introduction? The security guard asks. What's your apartment number? 20 minutes ago. I falter, my voice barely above a whisper. The security guard tells me to stay on my couch and that he will send someone up in just a moment or two. To keep my mind from racing, I delete the introduction clip and edit the rest of the video. I will just have to film a new introduction after this. It took 10 minutes before someone knocked on the door. It was not the security guard like I was expecting, rather, a box had been left on the welcome mat. I glanced around the hall and grabbed the box. It was in a takeout box with illegible writing written on it. Instead of opening it, I call security again. You told us it was a false alarm. No, I didn't, I exclaim, still rather quietly. I've been waiting for someone to knock on my door. I apologize, but you called our office as soon as we hung up the first time. I widened my eyes in disbelief at what I am hearing. Well, this time, I'm telling you to send someone up here. And do not cancel it until we've spoken in person. Someone left a strange box at my door. Right. I'll send them up shortly. After the line disconnected, my hands felt clammy. I set the strange container on my table and glanced at the time. It was only 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I was worried someone really was in my home, violating my privacy. It was like a strange epilogue to what Sasha had been asking me about after my nail appointment. I needed to use the bathroom, but I weighed the pros and cons of going near my bedroom. Avoiding the obvious danger, I decided to open the box and decide if the police was a better call to make. Inside the box was a wet piece of paper. I didn't dare pick up. On it was 5 words, scratched in something that looked like blood. I want to be you. The second I opened the box, a strange aroma filled the area. It was too late for me to realize that the wetness on that paper wasn't merely water or bodily fluids, but instead a chemical. My eyes grew heavy, and as I tried to reach for my phone to call the police, I saw the shadow of a person in my hallway, and my eyes grew tired. Bright light drew me out of sleep. I felt sick as my crusty eyes seemed to tear open in surprise to so much light. I must have left the kitchen light on, but why was I in the kitchen? I felt disoriented as I tried to stand up, holding onto the cabinets for extra strength. My mind was foggy as I glanced around my clean kitchen. Not a thing out of place. My head was in constant pain as I widened my eyes in disbelief at a strange symbol cut onto my hand. It was shaped like a rune or possibly a letter in a different language. I stumbled towards my couch where my phone lay in between 2 cushions. Looking at the time, I realized that maybe I got way too drunk last night with my friends and blacked out. I must have gotten inside on my own and fell asleep on the floor. Good thing it was a Saturday, or I would have missed my classes. It was almost 2 in the afternoon. My phone was almost dead, and I had 13 missed calls from my friend Sam, along with a text message. Before opening the message, I headed into the bathroom and rummaged through the medicine cabinet for some headache relief. After taking a few pills, I was situated firmly on my couch, next to the pretty skyline coming from the balcony. Opening the text, I glanced at it in shock. It was a string of conversation in which I had responded to her multiple times last night. 6:30 p.m. Sam. Babes, are you still coming out tonight? Want to get ready at my place? 6:45 p.m. Sam. I'm guessing all that editing caused you to take a nap. I can head over to yours. 7 p.m. Me. Hi, Sam. You're right. I did fall asleep, but I've got a major headache, so I think I'm going to sit this girl's night out. Sam. You're lucky, Cal. I was just about to drive to your place. I'll let Bev and Adriana know. Get some rest, okay? Me. I will. See you at the gym tomorrow? Sam. You know me, Cal. I will be too hungover to get up early. How's about Sunday? Me. Sure. See you then. I felt fine yesterday. Yesterday afternoon, at least. I couldn't really remember sending these text messages or even deciding I wanted to cancel plans. My dulled headache reminded me that maybe my excuse was real, and I just decided to rest yesterday. It doesn't really explain how I fell asleep on my floor, but I don't seem injured or anything. However, I decided to clean up my mess of a living room and get ready for the rest of the day instead of hanging on to that one aspect. I had fallen asleep numerous places after getting drunk, and as I did the dishes, I saw a wine glass that hadn't been there before. I rolled my eyes in literal disbelief of myself as I washed the glass and made a mental note to apologize to the girls for canceling. After cleaning my apartment and eating some toast, I decided to run some errands and go to the gym. My phone had been dead, so I let it charge in the car as I drove across campus town to get to the local grocery store. I got waves from strangers as I picked out good-looking apples, and someone tried to ask for my phone number by the frozen pizzas. It was honestly a normal afternoon, and nothing really stuck out to me about today until I got to the gym. I had already had a bit of sweat after carrying bags of groceries up to my apartment and putting them all away. I then ran here from my apartment, which prompted my heart rate to race. The usual receptionist raised an eyebrow as I walked in. Was there something wrong with my outfit? I glanced at my shoes as I scanned my gym badge. "Hello, Sydney," I greeted as she watched me peculiarly. Afternoon, Callie. Weird seeing you here." I glanced at the time. It was rather late. I know Sydney usually works morning shift, and I usually come in the morning, but I smiled anyways. "Yeah, I decided to come in later today as I woke up later than usual," I shyly responded. Picking up my water bottle, I had sat down and turning back towards her. I mean, it's weird because I'm working a double today, and you already came in this morning. I didn't know you like to go to the gym twice a day. Is this a vlog experience?" "I don't know what you're talking about, Sid," I acknowledged. "And I know we aren't allowed to film in the gym. I haven't been here yet today. Maybe you were confusing today and yesterday." I offer, setting my bag down as it was heavy and she seemed persistent to question me. "I thought for sure that was you. You even asked me about my brother's baby shower. I'm not friends with every 20-something that walks in those doors. I swear it was you." She ruffled a hand through her short gray hair. "Oh well, maybe someone who looks just like you came in this morning and we didn't have that conversation. I am getting pretty old. Enjoy your time at the gym, dear." Sydney seemed really confused as I walked into the women's locker room. I would know if I had gone to the gym in the morning, wouldn't I? Besides, I literally woke up at 2 p.m. today, so there's no way I went to the gym in the morning. I ignored my gut feeling and continued on with a typical workout. After working out, I left the gym and got my camcorder out, beginning to film. I stopped in my tracks when I saw the little gallery sneak peek it shows at the corner of the camera. I clicked on the box hesitantly. Sydney's comments from early, causing me to feel paranoia. The video popped up into view and the thumbnail was me, in identical workout clothes to what I was wearing now. It was filmed today at 7 a.m. "Hey babes, it's redacted here. And I feel that in order to live to your sexiest potential, early morning gym routines should be where you start. I got a lot of rest last night, so I'm ready to spin some grind potential at the gym." I paused the video in shock. I examined the paused image of me for a few more minutes, taking in every detail and every aspect of this. This was supposed to be me, but it wasn't. It was someone who looked exactly like me down to the smallest details. The only difference in details was minor, one that nobody would notice on the first, second, or even third try. Her shoe size looked to be maybe a half-inch bigger, at least on camera. I only noticed because we were standing in the same spot in the video. Her feet were wearing the same shoes as mine, and we were both standing beside a poster advertising a new movie in theaters. My shoe started at the edge of the poster board and stopped just a bit before hers did. If my shoe size was a 6, hers was a 6.5. How would I report someone for stealing my camera and pretending to be me if we looked exactly alike? Maybe fingerprints could tell the difference. Or maybe not. On the walk home, I examined the video 2 or 3 times to see if I could point out any noticeable differences. I spotted no more, and the strangeness of the video caused me to feel lightheaded. I took a seat on a bench just a few blocks between my house and made sure to use Bluetooth to upload the video to my phone. Realization hit that I had oddly not received any notifications since the messages from Sam. So I checked my phone while I was at it. It was in Do Not Disturb mode, something I only ever used if I needed to crack down for a serious test or something. I had it set to where I wouldn't get any notifications at all, and my phone wouldn't even show the Do Not Disturb banner or any notifications until I went into manual settings and turned it back to default. There's no way I accidentally turned that on. As soon as I turned Do Not Disturb off, my phone seemed to update. Hundreds of follower notifications pulling up about my new video. It was the nail salon video I was supposed to post today. I was going to make a note apologizing for a late posting, but it seems I had posted it right on time for today. Scrolling through the comments, I see nothing odd or sinister. It is odd that none of my friends texted me at all today, especially after I canceled last minute last night. I clicked on the Messages app and was truly shocked to see the numerous conversations that I had apparently had throughout the day. Dating app guy. That was great. Let's meet next week too. What was great? I furrowed my eyebrows and continued to the next conversation. All of these had already been open, and most had been responded to as if I had been engaging with people all day. 4 p.m. Mom. Dear, want to come over for dinner tonight? Me. Sure. What's Dad cooking this time? Mom. Meatloaf. Me. Count me in. I love when he makes that. It is 7 p.m. as I'm reading this, and I see a notification of me being tagged in a post on Facebook by my mom. I'm pale, and there's no way I can think of to best describe the way I am currently feeling as I click on the post. Facebook opens, and there I am, standing in a group photo with my little sister and 2 parents. The caption reads, "Our oldest came back for dinner tonight, and she's back to accomplish great things tomorrow." I immediately try to call my mom. Please answer, Mom. The bench is starting to feel cold, so I stand and start walking towards my apartment. Tears are in my eyes, and I feel as if I'm about to have a panic attack. Come on. Hello? Callie? Dear? Did you make it home all right? Thank God. Mom, hi. Yeah, I made it to my apartment great. I'm about to film a video of me removing these nails because I ended up not loving how the winter look turned out. That's great, sweetie. I forgot to mention this yesterday, but I received an email from your security guard. Did they ever figure out what was bothering you last night? It was a false alarm, Mom. I thought I saw the reflection of a person in my window, and there is probably a rat issue, but that was my reflection. I woke up after a particularly forceful bump. I came to the rattling of the train and the bright lights of the train car. I was fairly groggy and realized I still had my right earbud in. I quickly pulled my phone out of my pocket and tried to turn it on. It was dead, and the Bluetooth earbud in my ear had probably been the one that killed it. Realizing I must have been listening to music when I fell asleep, I put the bud back in its case and took a look around. There was no one in my car. The only thing I could see outside the window was the dark, damp walls of the tunnel I was passing through. I sighed and got up to stretch, pulling my arms out behind me and letting out a long yawn. Damn, how long was I asleep for? A quick glance to the left and right yet again showed no one. The other train cars, identical to mine, showed no signs of life. I noticed the floors were remarkably clean. Strange for a train on the New York subway. I grasped one of the poles in the middle of the car and started to walk over to the window on the door to the right. Finding the conductor was my first step to figuring out what was going on. Just as I took another step towards the door, the train suddenly started screeching to a stop. I nearly stumbled because of the sudden decrease in speed. I felt a turn in the tracks, and before I knew it, the train was at a full stop. The doors open, revealing an empty train station in front of me. I hop off, making my way up to where the conductor booth was. I tried my best to ignore the eerie creepiness around me as the front of the train came into view. I quickened my pace and went up to the window where the driver should be. There was not a soul inside. It looked just as plain and new as the rest of the train had been. I turned to see my surroundings and looked up. There I saw the large dark green sign that read Cameron Square. Where the hell is Cameron Square? I thought, turning to take a look at the large room in front of me. There were no other signs or maps to guide me. Upon further investigation, it wasn't a one-way station. There were no other signs or maps to guide me. Upon further investigation, it wasn't a one-way station. There were tracks on the other side. I ran to my left where I hadn't seen a small staircase, poking behind the center wall towards the back of where I had entered. I ran up the stairs and looked up. There was nothing but a black void in front of me, as if it had contemplated the decision for me. The familiar slam of doors and the screech of a leaving train brought me back to my senses. I spun around only to see the train pulling out from the station. There was nothing to think about now. The dull echo of my footsteps surrounded me as I made my way up the flight of stairs. I reached the top and stepped out. It was spacious and held the same familiar look of the entrance to any other New York station. Turnstiles to the front of me, and a booth with 4 windows next to it. A few more steps did nothing but make me feel more isolated. There hung large, empty frames where posters of local shows should be, or maybe some sort of corporate advertisement. After stepping over the cold metal bars of the turnstiles, there appeared to be no exit in sight. I started to walk around the space, at this point not entirely sure of what I was now looking for. I glanced at the farthermost corner of the room, where I was standing only to see the outline of a human figure pressed up against the wall. I stood completely still, squinting my eyes to make sure I wasn't imagining what I was seeing. I was frozen in a state of terror. I held my ground for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. Suddenly, the large rumbling of an approaching train met my ears and relief flooded over me as I realized that I now had a way out. I calculated a plan that once the train arrived, I'd wait about 20 seconds before turning and sprinting down the stairs towards it. Until then, I would just have to stay there, as still as possible. The figure didn't make a single move, but as I continued to concentrate my eyes on them, I made out that they were definitely wearing a hoodie over their head, and I noticed the clear shape of 2 shoes poking out from under their long pants. The train screeched and the pound sound of open doors echoed up towards me, signaling the train doors had now opened. I had no idea of what was in front of me was actually dangerous, but I knew I didn't want any confrontation with it, whoever they were. I was sure they weren't there to help me. After 20 seconds, or what felt like it, I turned and sprinted towards the turnstiles at full speed, leaping over them and running down the long flight of stairs. Not but a moment after I had started running, the heavy sound of what I took to be heavy boots began behind me. I had just reached the final landing, right before the final few steps of the stairs, when I noticed the footsteps had gotten a lot closer. I continued to run towards the train that was on the opposite of tracks where I had first entered. I bounded into the cabin and turned to see that same figure, now clearly showing the resemblance of a man charging towards me, fists clenched. He was probably 2 steps away from making his way inside, but just before he would be able to jump in, the door slammed shut in his face. He wasted no time in turning and running back to where he came. I stood there panting and watched him until he was out of my sight. A moment later, the train jolted forward and increased in speed, and I collapsed onto a plastic chair. My legs sprawled out, trying to calm myself as the strong kick of adrenaline left my body. Strangely, I felt a strong feeling of tiredness, and soon found myself struggling to keep my eyes open before giving up and letting the darkness consume me. I woke to a young woman waving her hand over my face. I sat up and she told me that I had been knocked out the duration of her trip, and she thought something might be wrong. I thanked her, but assured her I was quite all right. Before she left the open train doors, I asked her if she had ever heard of Cameron Station. She gave me a funny look and told me she hadn't. I struggled to my feet and dodged my way out of the open doors, into the crowded station of 42nd Street, Bryant Park. Everything was how it should be. Benches full, a crowd making their way down the stairs, and even more pushing their way onto the train. The experience I just had lingered with me even in the busy station, the terror still weighing on me. That's the story of why I don't ride the subway anymore. I remember when I was a child that my dad loved miniature scale trains. He built a whole scene around them that lit up with motorized functions on the train so they would circle a small mountain, passing under bridges and through tunnels. I was always so fascinated by the glow of the lights and the tiny houses in the town designed by my father. But looking back now through adult eyes, I think about just how weird some of the things that had happened around that train. The first night it happened, I fell asleep in the living room as my parents watched TV. I was staring into the little train model when I dozed off on the sofa. I had the most beautiful and fantastical dream that any child with a huge imagination at that age would have. The dream was beautiful. I was transported into the scenery my father had built. Beautiful green fields with soft grass under my feet. The sky was bright blue with fluffy cotton clouds. The sun felt warm on my skin and everything was peaceful apart from the chirping birds and the distant choo-chooing of a steam train. I dipped my feet into a lake, splashing at the fish and watched as they scattered away in the glistening clear water. I ended my little adventure shaking apples off the trees and laying on the ground, throwing one in the air and catching it. I woke up in my own bed. My father carried me to bed and tucked me in like he had always done when I fell asleep watching TV. The second night it happened, I purposely tried to fall asleep the same way, only this time I was with my babysitter Mandy. Mandy was a 16-year-old girl who lived 4 doors down and looked after all the neighbors' kids for extra pocket money. She took care of me that night when my parents went on a date night. Something they never really did, which, due to work, so I guess it must have been for something special. As my eyes started to get heavy, I looked closely into the model, tracing where I had traveled in my dream the night before. My eyes stopped suddenly and focused on an apple tree. Unlike before, under the apple tree were tiny apples scattered across the grass. Had I never noticed this before? And just like that, I was back. The sun on my face, the chirping of birds, the familiar sounds. This time I went on an adventure up the mountain until I saw houses. I ran over to the village, dancing through the streets and swinging off the streetlights. Everything felt so fake, plastic. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a young boy around my age. He sat on a brick wall drinking from a carton of milk. I I curiously confronted him, and to my surprise, he seemed to want to be my friend. I'm Henry. What's your name? Do you like milk? You can have some of mine. Looking back now, the childlike innocence was pretty cute. I took the milk carton off him, but when I tried to drink it, I noticed nothing came out. The milk was solid, plastic, fake. Frustrated and thirsty, I changed the subject and asked him if he wanted to play. He told me he couldn't because he was already lost and had to find his mother and get back home. I woke up again, this time from the key rattling in the lock and two very happy-looking parents. I never had a dream about it again. Life moved on and I grew up, had crushes, music phases, and boyfriends. I went to uni and got my first job. I fell in love some more. It was only recently I started to think about it because my dad passed away and I was tasked with clearing out some of his things. One of them being the train set. You see, when I looked at the set, a tiny figure of a little boy sat on the wall with a carton of milk. I showed my mother and told her the story and she was quiet for a moment. She told me that around that time a little boy my age had gone missing. His mother sent him out to get milk and he never returned. They found him shortly after, strangled next to a carton of spilled milk. They never found the killer. I've always had an innate fascination with mold and fungus, decomposers, and the way things can make their life and death. There's hundreds upon thousands of types of mold, like from the shit you cut off of cheese, and the white fuzzy stuff that looks like faux fur, to black mold that could slowly kill you without even raising a finger, just from breathing it in. It's horrific. From the human POV, but there's real beauty in it. I didn't come here to gush about mold. Or, well, I did, but not in that sense. I came to talk about my lab partner and her flu. Roberta Guzman has always been in my class. We didn't really run in the same circles, but I still considered her a close acquaintance. Someone I could probably trust. Before I start, she's not frail in the slightest. Doesn't get sick easily, and never more than a few days. This girl is built like a shit brick house. Well, for a 16-year-old she is. Real wide shoulders, kind of like a rugby player, and a head above the other girls. She played sports. She was active. She was outgoing, I think. I never actually heard of her hanging out with anyone outside of school, but she always had a gaggle of friends around her during classes. She would usually choose to spend her time in her books, though. Real smart. Which is why I was psyched to have her as my lab partner in the beginning. I'm not dumb by any means, but biology, labs, it's always good to have a second opinion, and mine just happened to get all A's without fail. It started out great. Roberta would take a majority of the work, kind of an overachiever, and I would provide corrections or opinions where it was needed. We got along great, had inside jokes, and she wouldn't snitch if I snuck a snack to our table in the mornings. A few weeks in, though, we started in on molds. I told you, I love the buggers. Mold is fascinating to me. But she took it to another level. At first, she wouldn't touch it, pushing the samples and hands-on work to me. Well, she did the paperwork, but I would see her looking at the samples from the corner of my eye when she thought I couldn't see her. Her expression was longing, hopeful, yearning. Weird ways to look at a plastic container of moldy bread, but I wasn't about to call her on something I could have easily imagined. The day before she got sick, she insisted, almost looking frantic, that she do all the work today. It was the last day of molds and such, but she always seemed so taken with them out of the corner of my eye. I let her. I just wrote down whatever I imagined to catch as she was spewing out paragraph after paragraph of observations and little fun facts about what we were working with she had learned recently. It was a normal day, a normal lab session, until she ate it. Just as we were packing up, she plucked the slide from my hands, pulled it apart, and just licked up. Black mold. Like she was licking butter from her fingers. Then she gave me a smile. I couldn't even make a noise. I was so shocked. I was still smiling from something she had said beforehand. Then she disappeared. She didn't come back to school for a solid month. After the first week, I got assigned to a new group. I asked a classmate what she had heard about Roberta. What was wrong with her? Some kind of flu, she said, and shrugged at me. Heard it was a lung infection, my other partner said. I believed it. I let it go. The next time I saw her, it wasn't in school. I was taking the city bus home, was standing and holding one of the bars when the woman next to me started coughing. It was an ugly cough, deep in the chest. There had been a smell coming from her, stale and damp. The whole bus had started to smell like an old basement. I turned to offer a tissue or something, and recognized those rugby shoulders. I was surprised. I asked where she had been and what it was happening to her. She gestured to the mask on her face, eyes crinkling in a sort of smile. Been sick, she told me, her voice deeper than normal, raspy from illness. I wish I could say we caught up the rest of the ride, but she turned away and I had to keep my mouth shut. The smell was stronger now, heady in my nose, and heavy on my tongue. She moved to get off at the next stop and I grabbed her sleeve, offering to drop off the work she had missed for the last month. She thanked me with her address and left. Her shirts had been damp and warm, and as she retreated, the smell lingered, but it was more of an aftertaste. I refused to believe the smell was her, but maybe she was sicker than she had let on. The next day, I got off at the same spot she had the day before, walking about 10 minutes, then 15, then 20 until I came up to the door of a house, smushed tightly between two others, both for sale. It was odd but not out of place. I knocked heavily on the door. Only one knock did it, though, as the door just fell in and landed. The door was rotted and wet. The smell hit me like a brick wall. This time was something sour mixed in. I brought my shirt collar up over my nose and mouth before stepping in. The carpet made a wet squelch as I sunk in. I swallowed down bile and moved on, calling out Roberta's name as I went. It was a 2-story house, and I had to walk through the front room to get to the stairs, where I heard the shower running. Their TV was on. Some cooking show, I think. I wasn't paying attention. The smell was so bad I almost had to leave. It coated my tongue in a sweet, acrid, rotting smell. Right on the couch was what I think might have been her parents once. I didn't stick around long enough to find out. They were blue and bloated, tongues fat and swollen, sticking out of their heads with their bulging eyes, and mold. There was mold everywhere. Mold, maggots, mushrooms, feeding on the decomposing bodies that may have once been people. I don't think I screamed, and if I did, there was no one to hear it. I dropped the stack of papers on the floor and fled, hand over my mouth. I did throw up, several fucking times. I can't get the taste out of my mouth. I've scrubbed my tongue raw over it. I couldn't tell my parents. I got home late and went straight to bed. She was at school the next day. She was sitting in her assigned lab spot waiting for me. Her skin still had a sickly pallor to it, all damp with sweat and holding a slightly bluish hue, just like her. Like the corpses, I could barely look at her. I just left. Hid out in the bathroom until she came to find me. She crouched down and touched my shoulder. "What's wrong?" she had asked, looking concerned. She reached up and pulled her mask down, and her face was decomposing. Her lower face was covered in holes and fuzzy white mold, circles of bread mold, and her teeth were rotting right out of her skull. I screamed something fierce. I left the school. I went home. The shoulder she had touched was damp and warm. I smelled like an old basement. She hasn't come back to school since I told my parents. Got the cops called on her. They found the bodies, but apparently weren't able to ID them. Then, nothing. Said it was a case of neglect. Then nothing. They just let it go. Thing is, I don't think she's gone. When I'm on the verge of sleep, some nights I smell her. I wake up and my sheets are damp at the end of the bed. My bedroom door rotted off its hinges last week. I don't know what to do. When I was little, I had an imaginary friend named Rosaline. I must have been around 4 years old, and I think I was a lonely child because I played with her all the time. We'd have tea parties in my room, and my parents would come in to ask who I was talking and laughing with, and it was always Rosaline. Our house was one of those old mansions from the 1890s that used to be in a large estate until the area developed around it. Most of the grounds were sold off and redeveloped, but it was still on a decent plot of land, and it was the only house around set so far back from the street. Rosaline seemed to always have secret nooks and crannies to explore with me. To me, she wasn't imaginary. She was a regular little girl, maybe a couple of years older than me, who lived in the well and came over to play with me every day. She had long blonde ringlets and always wore a blue dress. I asked my mom for a dress like that and was frustrated when she made me describe it. Why couldn't she see Rosaline? She's right here. I'd insist. The only thing I found weird about her was that she had dark red cherries instead of eyes. Because she's so sweet? My mother asked. Rosaline wasn't always sweet, though. If I didn't play the games she wanted, she would abandon me, and she often told me that my parents didn't belong in the house. Why? I asked. They're not sophisticated. She got mad when I wouldn't crawl down the well with her. One time she tried to get me to push my mother down the stairs. She said it would be funny. Thankfully, I didn't do it. I was a very obsessive child, and my parents enjoyed humoring my eccentricities. They helped me decorate my room and my Pegasus drawings. They let me dig up half the yard looking for a buried treasure. Once, when I was insistent, they set a place at the table for Rosaline and said they were both so excited to finally meet her. They even pretended to be talking to her, which was confusing for me, because I could hear what Rosaline said and it had nothing to do with my parents' conversation. I wonder if they got worried at all when I started having an argument with Rosaline because she wasn't eating. Anyways, one day Rosaline convinced me to play a game where we would jump off things that were higher and higher, and we'd see how high we could go. It started easily enough. Jump off 1 step, then 2 steps, then jump off the bed. We jumped off the front porch, which was maybe 5 feet from the ground, and I was already at my limit, but Rosaline had a way of convincing me. She would suddenly speak to me in an authoritative voice, like one my parents might use, and I had a very difficult time disobeying her. She said if I really wanted to be her best friend forever, I'd have to play jump until she couldn't go any further. She showed me how to get through the attic to a window on the 3rd floor. I'd never even been in the attic. It was a spooky place, full of boxes and odds and ends that had been in the house since my parents moved in. A thin layer of dust coated everything. Rosaline passed right through the spider webs, but I struggled to make it through. She showed me how to undo the latch at the window, then she jumped right out like it was no big deal. I was so afraid, but Rosaline kept whispering, "Best friends forever," and jumping out the window. She landed on the ground and waved back up at me, flashing her perfect smile completely unhurt. I cried and cried. I didn't think I could do it, but she was so insistent. I made her promise me I'd be all right, and I jumped. I woke up in the hospital having shattered my leg. My parents had rushed me there frantically, completely bewildered at why I'd jumped from the 3rd floor, let alone how I had gotten there through the attic in the first place. The next time I saw Rosaline, I told her that my parents said I couldn't play with her anymore. "You weren't watching me. You were supposed to land on your head," she told me. "We were going to be best friends forever." She cried red tears from the pits of her dark, cherry eyes. After that, I'd only see her out of the corner of my vision. Soon enough, I didn't see her at all, and more or less forgot about my imaginary friend. Last year, I traveled back at my parents' over the holidays with my daughter. She'd never seen that I grew up in an old mansion, and I was excited to visit. I had mostly good memories of the place. The second night we were there, I heard my daughter singing to herself in my old room, and I asked what she was doing. She said she'd made a friend with cherries for eyes who wanted to be best friends forever. I grabbed her and we left and spent the rest of the trip staying at a hotel. I'm definitely not bringing her to that house again until she's at least a teenager. It started when I crashed my car. Well, really, it started after. I had broken several bones and a few ribs, and hit my head on the steering wheel so hard I saw stars. The whole experience after was a blur, honestly. All I remember is the smell of the smoke steaming from the front of my car, seeing the tree I had crashed into, and being rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. There was a lot of blood. I'd been lying down in my hospital bed trying to sleep a few days after, connected to what seemed like too many IVs, when I saw it in the dim lighting of the room. Yellow eyes. Yellow eyes were behind the air vent above me. I blinked once, twice, 3 times. The yellow eyes were still there. They were wide and had no pupils, and were staring straight at me. I began to scream and tried scrambling off the bed. Fuck these IVs. I needed to get away from whatever the fuck that thing was. The yellow eyes didn't even blink once. They just kept staring at me with utterly no emotion. I couldn't believe how wide they were. A nurse rushed in while I was trying to remove the IVs in a panic. Honey, what's wrong?" she asked, eyes wide as she tried to make sense of the scene, and then to run over when she saw me trying to take my IVs out, placing her hand on mine to stop me. "Honey, you can't take those out. Talk to me. What's wrong?" I felt like I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to look at the vent. I began, chest heaving. "There's something in that vent," I exclaimed wildly, pointing up to the vent, but not daring to look myself again. The nurse furrowed her eyebrows as she looked up at the vent, and then looked over to me in what felt like a mixture of pity and confusion. "Sweetheart, There's nothing there. No fucking way. No, that's impossible. They were just there. I stopped to finally look back up to that wretched vent and gasped, and then screamed. The eyes were closer to the vent now, almost pressed against it, and I could finally see the outlines of a face. A horrific face. Not horrific in the sense of it was ugly, but it literally only had eyes. No nose, no mouth, just a pitch black face with wide yellow eyes. And pitch black in the sense of it had no fucking color. It looked like a shadow. It's still there, I cried, pushing the nurse away and doing my best to get the fuck out of this fucking hospital bed. You can't see it? The nurse was visibly panicking now, but took a deep breath and pushed a button on her badge. Miss Adler, there's absolutely nothing there. She began moving forward and placed her hands on my shoulders. I want you to breathe with me, okay? I couldn't. I fucking couldn't. Not when that thing was still staring at me. Not when I could see those terrifying eyes in my peripheral. No, I can't. How can you not see it? I screamed, writhing under her touch and pushing her away again. I needed to get out of this bed, out of this room, out of this hospital. I ripped the final IV out of my arm. More nurses came flooding through. Security, too. The nurse, Cindy, I learned her name was, began explaining the situation. What had that button she pushed been a panic button? I wasn't dangerous. How could none of these people see that fucking monster above my bed? They began to talk to me. I was out of bed now because I simply refused to be under that thing. Blood was dripping down my arm, but I didn't feel it. My pulse was racing too fast. I couldn't even hear much of what they said. Something about lowering the morphine that maybe that's why I was hallucinating. They agreed to move me to another room, which I wasn't entirely happy about, but I couldn't exactly walk away from the hospital in this condition. And funnily enough, I didn't see that horrible creature the rest of my stay there. I began to believe it really may have been the morphine and the other medications they had me on that made me hallucinate like that. I was released 4 days later and given some pain meds to cope with the pain. It felt good to be out, even though it was a hallucination. I had felt really comfortable with sitting in the same hospital I saw that awful, awful thing. I was getting ready for bed at my humble little trailer home I shared with my sister, who was currently away in London. She had saved all year to travel to when I dropped my phone. Fuck, I muttered. I had been trying to brush my teeth and text at the same time, which obviously wasn't the best choice with a cast on my left arm, but these pain meds were making me feel like Wonder Woman. No wonder people got addicted to opioids. Turned around and started slowly crouching down to pick it up. Fuck, broken ribs. When my blood ran cold. Eyes. Yellow eyes under the vent my phone had fallen onto. It had fallen screen first, so the light illuminated its shadowy face. It had no mouth, but I heard a low cackle that sounded almost maniacal. Inhuman. A bony, ghastly hand slid through the cracks of the vent and clenched the metal. It started pushing against it. I screamed. Fuck the phone. Fuck the toothbrush. I ran into the living room, grabbed my home phone and booked it outside. My injured body was screaming at me, but I didn't care. What the fuck? Like, what the fuck? I called 911, breath heaving and trembling in fear. I told the 911 operator to please hurry. There was something in my house. I couldn't think straight. Then something cold, so terribly cold, wrapped around my neck, and then a crack as something re-broke my arm. I dropped the phone. I screamed bloody murder and couldn't move. I was paralyzed. I felt something just as cold slide around my body, like a snake, and I was sobbing. Please, I begged over my hiccups. Please stop. Please, someone help me. But no one did. Of course, no one did. The closest neighbor was 2 miles away. Where the hell were the police? God, where the hell were the police? Then the cold traveled up my chest. The last thing I saw was its face. So close to me, we were almost touching. Its yellow eyes and a mouth appearing out of nowhere. Not a mouth. More like a hole as it got wider and wider, and an awful screech. The cops pulled up then, but I was nowhere to be found. I woke up in the middle of a dark field a week later. I went to the cops and my family who had been searching for me, and none of us can find any plausible reason how any of this happened. But my skin keeps getting darker. My mouth is getting harder to open and my nose is shrinking. I'm getting worried. I feel like I'm slowly losing myself to that yellow-eyed monster. I still see their yellow eyes in my vent, but every time I take a double take and look again, they're gone. Please help. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It broke the blissful silence I was in. There's no place more peaceful than the public library. My favorite part is the complete absence of noise. The mind is a beautiful place. I love hearing my thoughts. And being in medical school doesn't leave a lot of room for doing such a thing. The constant studying and absorption of new information creates mental bricks that end up creating a wall around the creativity section of my brain. My mind is too busy focusing on learning that I can't focus on enjoying. That's why I love the library so much. Even if I'm doing schoolwork, knowing that there's hundreds of lives that I have yet to live sitting around me, waiting for me to open their pages, is so freeing to me. It makes me feel like I have control over my own life. I like that feeling. I took my earphones out and reached into my pocket before wrenching my phone out from my jeans. It was a call from my boss. "Good afternoon, Mr. Clawthorne," I said after clicking the answer button. "Good afternoon, Atlas," he replied. "We've just got a new offer from Kleinberg Realty. They've got a house on Quentworth Avenue that needs to be looked after." I didn't really enjoy taking care of houses before they were bought. It's always given me the creeps, but hey, to get a lot of easy money as a starving medical school student, that's an offer I wouldn't give up for the world. "Sorry, sir. What was the address?" I replied. 19 Quentworth Avenue, he stated. "Please move in tomorrow." "Quentworth Avenue?" I replied in confusion. "I live near there. No house has been built there within the past decade." "Yes, it's a rather odd case. No one knows who built it." "What? Sorry, sir, I must have misheard you. I thought you said that they don't know who built it." "Yeah, that's exactly what I said. The house was reported there last week. No one lives in it, and no one had noticed its presence until then. There's no registry of the house, which means that we don't know what company built it." I sat there for a second staring into dead space. How can no one know who built it? How can a house have just appeared only minutes away from my apartment? I would have noticed on my way to the library. I've been coming here my entire life, which means I know the journey here. There's something that would have caught my attention. Kleinberg Realty have somewhat adopted it, in a sense, filled a registry under the company name. Now the house belongs to them, and they've instructed me to get a caretaker to move in tomorrow. "Pack your things tonight. I'll send you the details later." "Okay, Mr. Clawthorne. Have a good day, sir." "You too, Atlas." He hung up the phone. I sat there for a second thinking about my plan for the night. I was to be living full-time in a random house for an unknown period of time. That's just what my job entails. But who's going to want to buy a house that has no original registry? Who's going to want to buy a house with no known creator, no known age, no known past residencies, and no known origin? That night I fell asleep with everything I need for this day. I packed clothes, toiletries, and entertainment. Let's hope it's not as creepy as the old abandoned loony bin on the hill, Fortright Asylum. I thought. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I woke up bright-eyed at 6 o'clock that morning. I've always been a morning person. It's one of my better qualities. I started to drive to the house, completely unsure of what was to come. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw it was an email from my boss. I'd been looking forward to learning a little bit about the house beforehand, just for peace of mind. "Siri, read out this email," I said aloud. "Good morning, Atlas," she chimed. "Thank you for your patience. Here is all of the known information on the residency you will be taken care of. It's a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom home built in an unknown area." My stomach dropped. The builders and history of the house are both unknown. Good luck. I sat there with my mouth agape. How could so little be known about the origins of this house? I pulled up to the house. It was really nice, but there was something so wrong with it. I'd driven past this land most days for the majority of my life. Never had I seen this lot occupied. It had always been vacant. I stepped out of my car, pulled the keys out of my pocket, and walked up to the door. I pulled the door open and glared inside. Again, a very nice house. Old but modern. Small but big. I walked around the house, accommodating myself for maybe 10 minutes before I set myself down on the couch and turned on the TV. That's how I spent most of my time if I wasn't studying. Slowly, the world around me faded, and I fell asleep. I'd survived the first night at 19 Quentworth Avenue. Several days had passed. Nothing interesting at all had happened, other than several mice I'd found living in the property. It was when I was going to bed on the 4th night that I noticed a sticker on the bottom of the counter. That's odd, I thought. I pulled the sticker off of the marble countertop and held it under my phone light. It read, Nightfor & Co. I'd never heard of such a thing. I sat down on the couch and pulled out my laptop before looking up Nightfor & Co. on the internet. After I'd clicked enter, I was shocked to see that nothing came up, except for one lonesome website. A website that was titled Inquiries of Humium Masonry. I clicked on the site on instinct. After several painstaking seconds of slow internet and buffering, a page pulled up. Page not found. Thoroughly disappointed, I shut my laptop and made my way to my bedroom. The next morning I texted my friend Aisling. Aisling had been my friend since primary school. I asked him if he wanted to join me and get some coffee that morning, to which he replied with an emphatic yes. Although I did care about seeing him again, the prime reason for meeting up with him was to inquire about whatever Humium was, and whether he knew anything about the business Nightfor & Co. How did I know he'd have the answer? He was studying stonemasonry in college. After we'd caught up, taken our seats, and ordered our coffee, I propped the question. So, last night, I noticed a sticker on the bottom of the marble countertop on the house I'm looking after at the moment. There's no formal registry on the house, which means that no one knows when or how it was built. So, I looked up the company name on the sticker, and it came up with only one thing. A broken website that mentioned a material called Humium, which I'm guessing is what the marble countertop is made of. Can you give me a little detail about when or if humium was popular in housing? Aisling sat there for a moment with a bleak expression on his face. I learnt about humium on the first day I started studying stonemasonry. Someone asked about it in my college lecture. Humium was a type of marble discontinued in 1962 because any people living in a home that had it for more than a week were found so severely scarred and traumatized by something unknown that they could no longer speak. People couldn't connect it to humium, but that was the only thing in common between the 18 houses that the victims of it were found. I sat there in shock. But that doesn't make sense. People were found scarred and traumatized in their houses because of a countertop. The problem was global. There was absolutely nothing in common between each of the 18 houses other than the fact that they were all recently built and that humium had been installed nearly a week to the day before. I sat there in silence, contemplating the information. It's dangerous material, my friend. In the construction industry, it's somewhat of equal to saying Macbeth before a show in the theater. According to my college professor, it's less and less known nowadays. People have been trying to keep it on the down low to stop people freaking out. It's never been used in any construction since. It's literally impossible that it was found in your house, man. Maybe you dreamt it. You always talk about how caretaking for new houses exhausts you. I wasn't listening. All I knew was that what I saw was real. If that material was discontinued after 1962, then the only possible explanation is that the house comes from before that year. As soon as I got home that morning, I immediately sat down on the couch and opened my laptop to do my own research on humium. As soon as I looked it up, endless articles from decades earlier propped up on my feed. Most of them were photos of old newspaper articles from the late 50s and early 60s. I clicked on the top one. Yesterday at 19 Whitworth Avenue, a family of 4 were found paralyzed and petrified inside of their own home. Reports from the neighbors had stated that they hadn't seen them out of the house for several days. Each of the 4 members were found crouched in the same corner of their living room, with a stationary and chronic look of petrification upon their faces. So far, none of them have uttered a single word since they were found. What could have happened? I clicked on another link dated several weeks after the initial article. The family of 4 found petrified in their own homes nearly a month ago have shrunk in numbers. After 30-year-old Roman Delting hung himself and his children using bed sheets from their hospital wing, the mother of the 2 was moved to an asylum. Nurses and doctors of the hospital had stated that their mental state was worsening, and it would benefit her and the others around her if she were sent to a psychological treatment center. After reading that, an answer popped into my head. Something I'd been looking for this whole time. A solution. I clicked out of that article and sorted my search from the most recent. I clicked on an article dated merely 10 years earlier. The famous Whitworth horror story continues with 81-year-old Agnes Delting, who still resides in Cell 19 in Fort Wright Asylum nearly 50 years after the well-known mysterious event and death of her children and husband. That was all I needed to read. Fort Wright Asylum was a half-hour drive from where I lived. After an extremely intense and anxiety-inducing car ride there, I pulled into the parking lot and made my way into the asylum. To the complete opposition of my expectations, security was extremely lax. In fact, I didn't recall seeing a single guard on my way in. I kept walking through the asylum and I found the cell with the number 19 printed on the door. I cautiously opened it without knowing what was to be in front of me. After gauging the inside of the room, I let my guard down. In front of me was an extremely frail and old Agnes Delting, in a fetal position in the corner of her room. Agnes, do you mind if I have a chat with you? I didn't expect anything in return. It was public information that she hasn't uttered a single word since she was found in her home that night. After my expectations became a reality and I got no response, I turned to walk away. But as I walked away, I heard a horrific, raspy voice come from behind me. "You're too late. The hallucinations have started to set in." I turned to look at her, but she was gone. Slowly, everything around me began melting away. The process was so bright, and I had to shield my eyes, which meant I couldn't observe exactly what was happening. After a few seconds, the brightness flamed out, and I opened my eyes. I looked around me. Cobwebs and dust caked every inch of the now abandoned and moldy cell. Bricks were out of place, and the door behind me was off its hinges and on the ground. And then it hit me. My heart dropped. My blood ran cold. I was standing in the middle of the famously abandoned Fort Wright Asylum. I staggered out of the building. It was never real. The Agnes I'd seen there wasn't real. Nothing within that asylum was real. It was all a hallucination. I'd never felt so horrified in my life. It's a feeling I could never describe. I drunkenly opened my car door, turned on the car, and pressed my foot flat on the gas pedal. Barely conscious, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I picked it up. "Atlas, yes, it's Mr. Clawthorne. We've just gotten intel on who the house was built by. A company called Night 4 & Co." My heart sank. I hung up the phone. I just drove. I didn't know where I was going. My vision blurred until everything faded to black. I woke up to bright lights and frantic voices. I opened my eyes slowly and surveyed my room. Doctors, nurses, my mom and dad, all in a hospital room. I looked at the door. Room 19. "Oh my God, Atlas!" My mom yelped. "I'm so glad you're alive." I hugged my parents. For a moment, everything was okay. I was safe. I was never going near that house again. But in the corner of the room was Agnes, curled up in a fetal position. Upon noticing her, I pushed my family out of my way and walked towards her. Agnes made her way out of the room and through the hallway. She entered a room at the end of the hallway. Room 19. I looked around. Every room in the hospital was labeled Room 19. She opened the door and I immediately followed her in. To my horror, there was nothing in the room. A complete absence of solid matter. Just void. "What the fuck are you doing here?" I yelled. "I already told you," she said. "It's too late." Everything went black again. I woke up upside down. My seatbelt was around my neck. I was back in my car, having rolled several times after hitting a tree. Someone pulled me out of the car. A paramedic. Cops surrounded the car. I had to get rid of that house before it was too late. 19 Quentworth Avenue. Destroy the house. Bulldoze it. I yelled. "Sir, calm down. You've just been in a very serious accident." The paramedic responded. "Bulldoze the house, please." I shouted to anyone who would listen. "At least quarantine it, to prevent people from going inside." "Sir, are you..." But before he could finish, I'd already ran long out of earshot. I ran to the house and made my way inside. I don't know why. I don't know what I was thinking. I walked in to find Agnes and standing next to the counter. She stared daggers at me. "What you will be experiencing," she said, "for the rest of your existence is an endless cycle of hallucinations that causes a person's physical body to enter a paralytic state, while their mind remains free." As she spoke, she pushed me into the corner of the living room. "You, Atlas Elrod, or the 19th person to fall victim to the games of Night 4 and Co. I'm writing this on my phone. Friends and family have been trying to console me and snap me out of the state that they see me in for the past 2 hours. I've been responding, but they don't see anything. All they see is a frozen shell of what I once used to be. That's why we never thought the victims spoke. They did. We just couldn't see it. I'm writing this to call for help. Come and visit me and save me. You won't get a response, but trust me. On my end, I will be talking and reacting and breathing and existing. Help me. I've been keeping journals. There's a lot of them. I need the space and don't want to lose everything if one comes up missing. Sometimes I like to go back and read what I've written. It helps to keep track of it all. At first, only a single entry stood out. One little line I couldn't account for. I had gone over some thoughts from my day. Something about online conversations not seeming as real as they used to, and notice a sentence near the bottom of the page, not really following from anything else. I heard something in the house. That's it. No explanation, no follow-up. Just that one sentence. Naturally, I was taken aback. I didn't remember writing this, though clearly I had, and I didn't remember hearing anything out of place, though it seems I must have. I've read a few entries that were worded slightly different than I remembered. There's a few small details I've gotten wrong before checking back, but this was the first time I found something in my journals that I couldn't remember putting there. It's weird, obviously, but at the time I didn't consider it worth too much worry. Maybe I'd been a little out of it that day. I wrote in a big question mark. Flipped through the next few pages to make sure nothing else seemed out of place, and I moved on with my night. It didn't take long for curiosity to get the better of me. What exactly did I hear? There wasn't much to go on, so I decided I'd read the whole journal again. Maybe I forgot something else. There wasn't much of note. I did notice some lines looked a little rushed, which is odd. Usually I'm pretty calm when I write, and I couldn't think of a reason to be in a hurry. I started to make a note of it, but then I thought, I'm just getting in my own head. I found myself listening a lot over the next few days. I'd just sit there quietly, close my eyes, and wait. I don't know what I expected. The house was quiet. Other sounds, like the birds just outside my window, were the same as always. Maybe a little more distant. Sometimes, when I didn't hear anything else, I'd say things I remembered writing in my journals. It feels different when you say it out loud. Then I'd write about that. The next thing came near the beginning. I'd gone back to the first few journals. I'm so used to them now. I wanted to see the difference in my perspective back then. It was in the middle of the page, right after a paragraph on strange dreams. Not alone. Read enough of your own thoughts and you'll think you've gone mad. I tell myself that sometimes. I got all the journals. I went back to the beginning again and I read everything. First, the dates were wrong. Sometimes it's days. Sometimes it's months. Last time I cut my hair, which I'm sure was in May, is listed as February. And it's out of order. One of the first things that happened here, stepping on some broken glass after a picture frame fell and shattered, isn't mentioned until the third journal. That should be with the first week. I wrote about finding the first out-of-place sentence 2 journals ago. I haven't even touched that journal since before this started. It doesn't add up. Then I started finding events that never happened. The noise is too much. Can't sleep. It's happening every night. Then I go to check and there's nothing. Why is it doing this? A few of the lights shattered earlier. Nothing happens while I'm watching, just when I turn my back. Need to figure this out. The couch was in a different spot this morning. Weird. Things I would remember and things I don't. I'm not an idiot. It's my own handwriting, I'm sure of that. I didn't write this stuff, but nobody else could have. Occasional entries would address me directly. I remember some of it. I like to put in little messages from time to time when I read it later. Maybe something like, "You'll miss this when it's over." But some of them didn't make sense. "You were taking too long. You were not listening. What did you do?" Others were a few words at the end of certain pages repeated from the previous paragraph. Thinking about when all happening. Eventually I started responding. "Stop doing this. Leave me alone." I said some of them out loud. I didn't think it would make a difference, but it felt good. I put the journals away. I couldn't deal with them anymore. It's getting in my head, but I can't stop thinking about them, and the more I think, the more I can almost picture it. Like the lights just as I leave the room. I hear them shatter. I know it didn't happen. I didn't remember anything like that before reading it. I'm just worried I'll make myself remember. Today, I heard a noise in the house. Some kind of movement. It took a while, but eventually I found the courage to leave my room and look around. My journals were scattered everywhere. I grabbed the one nearest to me and out of instinct checked the first page. Not alone. That's all it said, over and over. Maybe I'm not. I honestly don't know anymore. Either way, once I get this down, the journals are done. No more reading them. No more writing them. That's why I want this here instead. Whatever the rest of you end up thinking about it all, at least I'm not just talking to myself.